Hello and welcome. I'm Manur, and today I will be talking about taking the IELTS exam and nailing the IELTS exam. So, if your first language is not English and you're moving towards a country for graduation, for postgrad, or for job where you need to be speaking the English language, you have to take the IELTS exam, or depending where you're going, there can be certain other tests such as the TOEFL exam or the PTE in case of Australia. But whatever the case, you have to take an English language exam for moving to an English language speaking country. So I had taken the IELTS exam. I am more familiar with it and I will be talking about that. Firstly, before you think about nailing an exam, you need to understand the exam, what that exam consists of, and if you're not familiar with what that exam is seeking or what it comprises of, nailing that exam is quite difficult. So firstly, you need to understand what the IELTS test comprises of. For that, I will be sharing my screen with you to show you a few slides which I have picked up from the British Council IELTS website. It is freely available on the internet, all the information you can find if you search for it, but I have made it into three slides where you can understand what the test seeks and the band scores and what do those band score means, how you are marked for those band scores. So I will share my screen with you and let's dig into it. So the IELTS test basically comprises of four different components, that is speaking, writing, reading, and listening. The speaking test is generally 10 to 15 minutes where you have to introduce yourself and then talk on a topic for a few minutes and then answer a few leading questions from that topic. This is generally before the other components are tested because the writing, listening, and reading are held on paper or on computer, whereas the speaking test is face to face. So this is the smallest part and held separately, whereas writing is 60 minutes, reading is 60 minutes, and listening is 30 minutes. The listening and reading part are scored out of 40, and you get MCQs or true and false or charts to fill on the basis of what you have read or what you're listening to. The important thing is that for the listening test, you have to practice answering the questions in front of you as you listen, because the recording will only be played once, it will not be repeated. So that comprises the listening test. You're given 30 minutes to answer questions as you listen. The reading test, you get two passages where you have to read and then answer questions regarding those passages. The writing test comprises of two components, task 1 and task 2. Task 1 is where you are given a graph or any sort of illustration which you have to explain in minimum 150 words. But if you want to score better, you should go above 150 words, as long as you do not make it unnecessarily long or you lose coherence along the way. For task 2, you have to write an essay on any given topic, and again, if you want to score higher, you need to go above 250 words as long as it is still logical, coherent, and makes sense. So that is all that the IELTS test comprises of. Now coming to the scores, the band scores. The band scores range from 0 to 9. 9 is an expert level, whereas 0 means you did not attempt the test. When you're practicing, you need to practice for the highest possible level for all four components so that you can achieve better scores. Now, there is an overall score, that is an overall band score that you achieve, which is an average of the bands that you achieve in all four different components: writing, reading, speaking, and listening. Each of those four modules have their own score, and then you get an average score. So you need to practice for the highest possible level or the expert user level so that you can at least get a good score depending on your familiarity and your practice with each different module. Now these are the solid bands, but you can also be scored 7.5, 8.5 depending on how well you score on those exams. Now, how are these exams scored for? So for listening and for reading, as I said, you have MCQs and you are scored out of 40. So if you have a score of 16 out of 40, you get 5 bands, and a score of 35 gives you 8 bands. If you go above 35, you can get 8.5, and a score of 39 or 40 gives you a score of 9. The reading is scored similarly. A score of 35 gives you 8 bands, and so are the corresponding scores defined here. And if you go above 35, you can get 8.5, and a score of 39 or 40 gives you 9 bands. Whereas for writing, both task 1 and task 2, the first sort of weightage, 25% of the score depends on achieving the task. That is, you respond to the task and you answer the question. For task 1, you clearly explain the graph correctly. For task 2, you actually answer the question or address the essay topic correctly. Coherence and cohesion means you should have a logical flow in the essay you write or the explanation you're giving. Lexical resource means the range of vocabulary you use, and it shows them that you are familiar with the language and how familiar you are. How many words do you know? But this does not mean that you should use overly complicated words which people do not use in their daily conversations and stuff. You need to strike a balance between how many tough words you're using. It needs to make sense because you're also being scored on the logical flow. And then there is the grammatical range and accuracy. So you need to use correct grammar, and accuracy means your spelling and the usage of grammar, sentence structures should be correct. The speaking test has a similar kind of scoring where your fluency and coherence are given 25%. Again, your vocabulary is marked by 25%, your grammatical range and accuracy of using those words, and then the pronunciation. So this really depends on which test you book. There are two different major companies or major sources of taking the IELTS exam. One is the British Council and second is the AEO or the Australian IELTS. Whichever you book, you need to check with how they pronounce certain words, and it depends on which language you're more or which sort of pronunciation or accent you're more familiar with. I took the British Council test, and this is all information taken from the British Council IELTS website. I took this test because I was aiming to come to the UK, and the professor from Imperial College London told me that UK prefers the British Council IELTS for obvious reasons. And if you're going to Australia, you might want to book the AEO test, but I believe Australia also accepts the British Council IELTS test. So you need to check this with wherever you are aiming to go, which one they accept, or if they have any reservation or any partiality towards a kind of test. You can find this out or ask them. The British Council IELTS is, I believe, more widely accepted. It totally depends on what you want to go for. It also depends on your familiarity with the accent. I did not choose the AEO because one, I was coming to the UK. Number two, the Australian accent is a bit difficult for me to understand at times, and because the listening test really depends on your understanding of the accent and language usage. So always go for the test that you think you would be able to crack better in terms of listening, most importantly, and then also for speaking, because writing and reading is just written on paper, but listening and speaking really depend on the test center, or sorry, not test center, but the company or the source of your IELTS test. So that is basically all that you need to know. Now, once you know what the test comprises or what the test seeks, you understand the band scores and you understand the way those scores are achieved, or they mark you for those different components, then you start your preparation. And how do you start preparation depends on your ease with the use of the language. So if you're listening to this video and you have no problem understanding what I'm saying, then you do not need a proper coach, or you do not need to join any coaching center or learning center to learn IELTS. You only need a stable internet source, which I believe you already have since you're watching this video, and you just need to search online for practice tests. One thing that you can do, and which I did while I was practicing my IELTS exam, is buying certain test papers or books, and these are generally available freely on any bookshop. I use the Cambridge IELTS test papers, which are in the form of books. When I took the test, they had book 1 till 13, that is 13 different books, and each book contained 4 complete tests. For example, 4 writing test, 4 reading, 4 listening, and 4 speaking test, or 4 questions for the speaking test that you can practice. So buy just 1 or 2 books and you will get 4 or 8 or 12, how many books you buy, complete tests that you can practice on. I started with listening practice, because I do sometimes have trouble with listening things clearly. So I practiced that first of all. Then I practiced speaking, and for speaking, what I did was record my own voice on a certain topic and then listen to it to see if I am like having a bit of trouble speaking, or there are certain words that I'm not pronouncing correctly. And that is how I did it. Then reading and writing, I practiced through the internet, saw certain MCQs and through the books as well. And for writing, I would suggest that you write it by hand, not type, unless you're going for the computerized exam, because in the test you have to write. If you're going to the test center, you have to write with a pencil or a pen on a paper, and you need to practice that. If you are going for the written test and not the computerized test, then you need to practice similarly. So this is how I did the practice, and I scored an overall score of 8.5 bands. Very honest, I had been using the English language since my childhood, because I studied from an English medium school and it wasn't so difficult for me, but still familiarizing yourself with the test is really, really important. And even if you are familiar with the language, you use it daily, but you do not practice accordingly or see what they want, there's a chance you wouldn't score well. So instead of being overly confident that you speak the language daily, it is better that you practice. And if you struggle with speaking, it is good to have a speaking partner or someone who would listen to you or give you tips and tricks. This can ideally be someone who is also planning to take the test or who has taken the test before you, so they can help you along. The way I did speaking practice was, one, I recorded my own voice, and two, before I took the test, a few of my friends took the test and I helped them practice. So while I was helping them, I was also learning myself, and that is the best way to go. Secondly, for reading and listening, I bought two of the Cambridge test books and I practiced on them, and that was enough because that gave me 8 different tests. For listening, I had the CD from those books which I practiced through, and the writing test, I took a lot of different components available in those books and a lot of different essay topics available on the internet, and I practiced along with that. Depending on how familiar you are with the language, you just need to make sure that you fulfill the criteria to get the desired score. What I mean by fulfilling the criteria is, if you are considering the writing test, which is somewhere you think you will find difficulty, then practice writing not only in terms of just fulfilling the 250 word requirement or 150 word requirement for task 1, but understanding how those words should be written. What vocabulary do you use? Do not overuse difficult words, and just make sure there's a logical flow between your words and the essay that you're trying to depict. If the essay asks you a question and asks your opinion, whether you agree to the statement or not, you have to mention clearly whether you agree or not. If you do not answer that question, you will lose 25% of the marks, because 25% of the weightage is in achieving the task, answering the question. And if you want to practice more and understand the logic behind the test and how they score you, there is a lot of free resource available on the internet. There are a lot of different tips and tricks available from people who have already taken the test. And one of the sources I really relied on was the Liz IELTS test YouTube videos, and also her website where she discusses test papers and the topics that most commonly come up in these tests. So there is a ton of free resource available on the internet. You just need to make sure that you understand what the test asks for, you understand the scoring system, and then you practice through a dozen different resources present. Do not confuse yourself with the resources present. Just pick one or two resources that you know you can trust. I trusted the Liz IELTS videos because she was a professional IELTS teacher, and she has a lot of different videos and resources freely available which you can use. There are a number of different people who are freely teaching IELTS over the internet. You can follow them. Just need to practice. It doesn't take long. Depending on how much you struggle or how much you want to practice, IELTS exam practice can take anywhere between 1 week to many months, depending on how much time you give to it every day. I practiced for 2 weeks straight, giving an hour or two every day. So, and that was enough. I scored 8.5, and I think you can too. It is not that difficult. as long as you practice it, take it seriously, and do not be overconfident if you can already speak the language, but you still need to understand the test and understand how you are scored. Just speaking the language or having read a lot of books does not mean you're going to score well. You have to practice because it is a test that tests you in a certain way. So you need to understand that way. Once you understand that, you should be okay. You will score well. There's no reason why you can't get your desired score if you are familiar with the language, as long as you practice for the test. That is all from my side for today. If you have any further questions, please comment down below. I would be happy to answer them. And if you want tips and tricks for separate modules, please let me know and I will consider sharing more ideas with you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.